Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I am delighted to be here with Minister Jonathan Renouf, the Minister of Environment and Energy from the Crown Dependency of Jersey in the Channel Islands, who today will be telling us a little bit about Jersey's efforts when it comes to net zero, decarbonization, and renewable energy. We appreciate, I know it was a late night flight last night, so we appreciate you persevering to join us today. Maybe just to kick off, what does it mean for Jersey to engage in COP, and what brings you to Dubai for this event?
So Jersey's been on a very interesting journey in terms of climate change, and I think one of the key things that's happened is we have had the Paris Agreement extended to Jersey by the UK government. So we're a Crown dependency, which means we're effectively represented internationally by the UK. But we have this ability to have treaties and so on extended to us, and we extended the Paris Agreement. And because of that, we have gained access to places, to events like this. And it's been fantastically important for the island to raise the profile and to tell what I think is quite a good story, in a way, about what Jersey is doing in terms of net zero.
And I understand maybe much of that engagement is around mitigation, the decarbonization angle. I'm curious if there is a adaptation side at all, because I know earlier this year that Jersey was quite badly hit by a storm. I was actually in the Isle of Wight at the time, and it just missed us, but I know it was pretty bad in the Channel Islands.
Yes, we had a very, very bad storm, lost between 20 and 30,000 trees. There was a tornado that came through the island and destroyed quite a few houses. Luckily, no loss of life. And last year, we had the hottest summer that Jersey has ever had, including the hottest temperatures, the hottest nighttime temperatures, a very severe drought. So there's no question that climate change is affecting us. And I think in terms of adaptation, one of the big things we have to focus on actually is protecting our shoreline, our coastline, because we are very vulnerable to storm surges. We have a lot of wind coming in from the southwest, and we have high tide, a very big tidal range. And if those two things coincide, a high tide and a storm in terms of the wind, then we're in trouble. So we have a long-term program of building up our shore defenses.
Okay, so when it comes to decarbonization, what is happening on the island, and what are the main initiatives that are being undertaken to reduce Jersey's carbon footprint? So
it began, I suppose, well, you could point to many beginning places, but in 2019, the States Assembly, that's our parliament, declared a climate emergency. And that set in train a series of events. And one of the things it led to was a citizens' assembly, and the last session people were talking about that. And it was very interesting to hear that, because it mirrors very much what the experience was in Jersey. It was a very, very inclusive event, and it really helped move the conversation on. And it also, as was remarked earlier, it's interesting how when ordinary people confront the evidence and get taken through the science, they end up being, more determined than the politicians in many ways. So that was very interesting. It led to a carbon neutral roadmap, which was adopted by the island's parliament. And the key parts of that, I suppose, are that there's a levy on fuel duty. There's a fuel duty levy that funds a climate emergency fund that is used to put in place decarbonisation measures. And those focus at the moment on our two biggest areas of carbon emissions on the island, which are transport and home heating. And so we have some incentives in place for electric bikes, for the electric vehicles. We're experimenting with a car sharing service that we've subsidised. And in the home heating, we're subsidising a range of electrical alternatives, because we are in the lucky position that our electricity supply is fully decarbonised. So essentially, if we can just switch people away from fossil fuels to electricity, it's job done. But obviously, it's a little bit harder than that when it comes to the detail.
Okay, very interesting. So most people now are getting their heating through oil-based heating at home?
So there's a lot of oil-based heating because there's a lot of, it's a very dispersed settlement pattern. So there's a lot of properties have oil tanks. It's an expensive business to run electricity cables right out into the countryside to just a few isolated homes. We have the same problem with water, actually. There's a lot of houses still on wells and their own water supply. So we have that problem. And there's also quite a big gas network in the more urbanized areas. But we have made quite a bit of progress on that decarbonisation of home heating. But the maths are against us. You know, we've probably got 20,000 homes to shift. And you can tell, you know, we're doing about 200 a year at the moment. We need to be almost at 10 times that. And that means there's skills shortages, there's bottlenecks that we have to work on. It's not just about putting the money out there and giving the incentives. It's about building up supply chains, building up skills so that we have the capacity to make the change.
So right now, Jersey imports the majority of its electricity. You are, I guess, fortunate after the previous conversation. Many islands would say fortunate to have that cable that connects you to continental Europe, to France, from which you're able to import electricity. You are exploring the idea of renewables in a larger way. So I guess what's the current status of renewable energy generation on the island today?
So the current status is that we have small-scale solar. It's become much more popular recently. The economics, as in many places, has shifted in that direction. But that's about it, really. And the opportunity that we have is we're a small rock in the English Channel, and if you face west, it's Canada is the next landfall. So there's a lot of wind coming in. And so we have the potential to put a wind farm off our southwest coast, a very large wind farm. There's a patch of our territorial waters there that could take that. And we know it would work because the French, on the other side of the boundary, have already put a wind farm in, which we can see. So, you know, we're kind of in that position where we kind of think, well, they've got it. It surely is going to work for us, or could work for us. Obviously, there are qualifications to that. So that's our opportunity. And that would be potentially up to 1 gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts, which is 6 times more electricity than we currently consume. So that becomes an energy export opportunity for the island. And that has significance in lots of different ways. It's an economic development story, but it also could help contribute money towards further decarbonisation measures. So, you know, you could imagine taking a proportion of, say, tax revenues, if you're taxing that, and using that to help decarbonise.
Very interesting. So in a short period of time, you could turn the island entirely from an energy importer to an energy exporter. I know there's been other islands like Orkney that have gone a similar route. You'd have to put in a new cable, I think you mentioned.
We would, because it's in a different part of the island to where the current cable runs. But I would qualify that slightly. We can't rely entirely on the wind. Even a wind farm that generates potentially six times as much electricity, there will still be days when the wind doesn't blow. And for that, we will still need the interconnector to France. So there's a balance in terms of how much you would want to export and how much you'd want to import. But what it does give you, I think, is the potential for quite a lot of stability in pricing of electricity, because you have that wind farm contributing some of your electricity and you know the price well into the future, potentially.
And again, putting you in quite an advantageous position compared to some of the islands that we heard about earlier, in that your battery is France, essentially. You don't need that huge battery backup system.
That is the huge advantage of being in this strange sort of almost in-between zone where we're only 15 odd kilometers from the French coast, and so we're in that almost in a transition zone in a way. We're not part of the EU, obviously, and neither is the UK, but we're close enough that we can make some of our own unique arrangements, because there's nowhere else like us. You know, and so we can try and carve out just that little bit of a unique relationship. It's, you know, there's limits to that space diplomatically, but I think there is some potential there.
What is the reaction of the general public to these efforts? I mean, not just the wind farm, but the wider efforts and the movement towards net zero on the island? You mentioned the Citizens Assembly and at some point the general backing of declaring the climate emergency. But are you finding that there's any pushback with any of these initiatives or general support? Because I think one of the challenges you have as a relatively small island, 100,000 or so people, people might think, well, we're not really contributing that much in the grand scheme of things. So why should we, a small island, invest in decarbonizing?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely the pushback, and we're seeing it throughout Europe now. And Jersey isn't immune to it, and it's partly relates to this equity issue. You know, we have a cost of living crisis, and because of that, the impact of net zero measures falls unequally. And that is being felt in Jersey just as it is elsewhere. And so I think there's definitely pushback on things like fuel duty being put up to pay for decarbonisation measures, and I think we have to respond to that. And there's also pushback, in terms of measures like we might want to decarbonise the construction sector and so on. But again, those supply chain issues, the speed with which the industry can adapt. So what we're finding is we're just having to slow the pace a little bit to be realistic about what can be achieved, and to undermine what has generally, up until now, been pretty good public support.
Okay, very, very interesting. And as you say, that reflects the conversation happening across much of Europe. Everyone is green until they see the cost.
Until they see the bill.
Exactly. But it's great to see that there is movement there, and that you have certain initiatives with some backing. So coming back to COP, we're here in Dubai for the COP28. What does the coordination between Jersey as a crown dependency look like? Obviously, Jersey does not have a direct seat at the table in the negotiation room. It's represented via London and the UK government. But there are other crown dependencies here. The overseas territories are well represented. Obviously, UK and Scottish government and other governments are here. So what does the coordination look like between Jersey, those that I just mentioned, and maybe other islands around the world?
I think one of the great advantages of this, of being here, is that we're expanding that network all the time, and learning different places that we can either learn from ourselves or to which we can contribute in some way, and that feels quite powerful. I think the other thing that being here should remind us is that net zero is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity on many levels. It's obviously an opportunity in some ways to have cleaner air because you're burning less fossil fuels, and there's those sort of improved advantages. But it's also an opportunity in economic terms, in terms of forging links with places that may be trying to do similar things, and in terms of profile, I guess, in terms of helping people to understand who you are and what you can do. And I think of net zero as something that can give a new spin to what Jersey stands for. It's a thing that tells people that we're doing something good in the world, and that we have something to give in that. And so when people talk about the cost, I try to refocus it on yes, there's a upfront cost, but there's also a lot of benefit that spins out of that. For Jersey, both at a micro scale but also in an international sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very interesting opportunity as well for Jersey and the other Channel Islands to connect with different islands. I mean, you mentioned if you look west, you see Canada. So we are hosting our.
You don't quite see it.
Metaphorically, look west over to Canada.
Curvature of the earth and all that sort of thing.
The first island that you would see would be Prince Edward Island, which we've been working with, and we had speakers from Prince Edward Island participating today. Another island on the other side of the Atlantic, working on its net zero policies and energy policies. And I think that's exactly what we're doing here at the Island of Hope, and through the programs are looking for opportunities for islands like Jersey to share what they've learned and also learn from other places like Prince Edward Island. So we hope, and I'll invite the audience to join us for that conference in Canada, taking place next year for this kind of international island collaboration.
No, brilliant. No, well, I hope I'd be able to come because I'll probably fly rather than just getting on the boat and going in a straight line. But no, I think that networking effect is so powerful. And we are diverse. You know, there's lots of islands which have got completely different challenges to the ones that Jersey has. But there are also these really interesting areas of commonality you discover. You know, for example, in the construction sector, you know, how do you deal with waste? Islands have a lot of problems dealing with construction waste and decarbonising that sector. And those are things that apply, you know, in lots of different types of island. And it's really interesting to see the different solutions that people are coming up with for that.
Absolutely. Well, Minister Renouf, thank you so much for joining us here at the Island of Hope. We really appreciate your time, and it was very interesting to learn more about Jersey's approach to decarbonisation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That is all for today. Thank you to those who stayed till the very end, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you back tomorrow for the last day of our Island of Hope. Thank you.